Media request for information session. Just a note that we will be recording this session and we will be captioning it later today and posting it on the Request for Services webpage as soon as we can. We'll refer to this Request for Services as RFS from now on, and we'll also share the webpage in a few slides here in case you haven't already found it. This Request for Service is being issued by the Minnesota Department of Health, and MDH has created special teams to work on various aspects of our COVID-19 response. These contracts will be part of the work of the MDH COVID-19 Cultural and Faith Communities Engagement Branch. This branch is led by Danushka Wandragala. Ann Lindy is the deputy, you see pictured here. Ku Tao is the chief of the entire COVID-19 partners section, which includes the Cultural and Faith Communities Engagement Branch. And then we have a contracts team within that branch. I'm Bridget Palladian. Needed to update my name on here. I'm Bridget Palladian, and I'm the contracts lead within the Cultural and Faith Communities branch. And Meredith Algren is the deputy lead for the contracts team. Within the contracts team, we have about 15 other staff members, many of whom are contract managers and are working closely with our currently funded contractors and will be working closely with those who are funded through this request for services. So this is the agenda for this morning. We will mostly be walking you through the key parts of the RFS. If you have questions as we present, please feel free to type them into the chat bar on your screen. We'll compile them as they come through, and at the end, we'll answer the ones that we have time for. But all questions that are submitted, whether we have time to answer them during the webinar or not, will be posted to the website with responses. So you'll get your answer either way, and we'll share the link for where to find the questions and answers that have been submitted also later in one of these slides. So this is the URL for the web page for the COVID-19 contracts request for services for diverse media. The image here is for a kind of a landing page that explains our broader contracts initiative within the Cultural and Faith Communities branch. So you can learn more about the existing contracts that we have, and then these two requests for services that we have just issued this week. So we'll get into the meat of it here. So the request is for media services to aid MDH in disseminating culturally relevant, linguistically appropriate, accurate, and timely messages with COVID-19. Audiences, I'm just going to pause here for a moment. If you mute your mics, please, unless you're asking a question, that would be wonderful. Thank you. The primary audiences for the messages and services are communities of color, American Indian communities, and LGBTQ communities in Minnesota. The media services can include formats such as online and social media, radio, television, print, and other formats. And vendors are encouraged to use methods that are able to quickly changing information. As I mentioned before, the primary audience must include one of the following populations in African American, African immigrant, American Indian, Asian American, Latinx, and LGBTQ. But vendors are encouraged to reach diverse communities within communities of color and American Indian communities, or communities at the intersections of communities that experience inequities, such as people of color and American Indians with disabilities, or people of color and American Indians who are LGBTQ, etc. Selection of contractors through this request for services will be through a competitive of proposals. Selected contractors need to reach all of the major ethnic, racial, and cultural communities in Minnesota and cover a range of communication modalities and geographic areas. So proposals will be reviewed and scored competitively, and then the decision-making process will also take into consideration whether we're reaching a broad range of communities and covering a broad range of communication modalities and geographic areas. Priority will be given to media entities that are owned by people of color, American Indians, and/or LGBTQ individuals. And we will prioritize vendors, geographic areas, and communication methods that are already currently represented in our existing contracts with media vendors. And you can find a list of those who we currently have contracts with on that webpage that I referenced a couple slides ago. This is the broad overarching timeline. Request for services released yesterday on May 25th. The deadline to submit questions is next Monday, June 1st by 5 p.m. And this is to ensure that we have time to answer them and post the answers by June 2nd so that all applicants have access to the same information. Then on June 3rd, next Wednesday, is the deadline for proposals. Proposals must be submitted by 11:15 p.m. on June 3rd. And we anticipate that contracts will be able to start around July 1st. And this leaves several weeks for processing applications, for the competitive review process to take place, for contractors to be selected, and for negotiations to take place with those contractors in order to get a work plan and budget negotiated so that contractors may begin work. We anticipate that these contracts will run through the end of the year, December 31st, 2020. The goal of this request for services is that all reside in Minnesota and the 11 tribal nations that share its geography, including residents from communities of color, American Indian residents, LGBTQ residents, and residents with limited English proficiency, have the opportunity to be fully informed with culturally relevant, linguistically appropriate, accurate, and timely messages related to COVID-19. We have $750,000 available for multiple media contracts through this process. So out of all of the applicants that submit a proposal for this, we expect to award multiple contracts. And we seek proposals in the categories described on this slide. We award some contracts of less than $50,000, and those contracts may reach a single cultural community and or use less frequent communication methods such as weekly or biweekly. And then we expect we may fund several awards in the category between $50,000 and $150,000. And those proposals may reach multiple communities and or use multiple communication methods on a daily or more frequent basis. So in general, the funding amount that an applicant requests should align with how often they're reaching their community and how many communities or how big the communities are that they're reaching. And then also just to note that the request for services is intended for media vendors or organization whose primary focus is providing media services. So contractor responsibilities or sample tasks as it's listed in the request for services on the website. Contractors who are selected for funding will finalize their communication plan with the Department of Health. That may include same-day turnaround for cultural adaptation or translation of messages if that's needed for the target audience. It may include radio or television interviews with MDH staff or with other community leaders related to COVID-19 or related to some of the new upcoming phases of the pandemic, including contact tracing and case interviews. And it may include paid advertising or other social media. Those are just a few examples, but it's not activities are not limited to those. Although that frequency may change as the pandemic develops. So contractors will participate in those to make sure that they're staying on top of the latest information to then share out to their communities. Contractors will adapt those messages for the different communication modality, that whether it's online, social media, radio, television, or print, and then they'll disseminate those adapted messages. And then periodically throughout the contract period, contractors will be asked to prepare brief reports for the state to update MDH on activities conducted, reach of messages, etc. Okay, response requirements and submission. So interested responders should complete the proposal submission form found on the Diverse Media RFS webpage. And after you submit that form, you'll receive an automated confirmation email. Responders should reply to that email and attach the supplemental materials that are described in the RFS on the webpage. Please note, in addition to submitting your proposal submission form, all of your supplemental materials must be received by 11:59 p.m. on June 3rd. So there's 2 steps to applying. First, the proposal submission form, and second, emailing in all of your attachments. And both of those pieces of your application must be received by 11:59 p.m. on June 3rd for your application to be considered complete and to move forward in the review process. So again, here are those different portions of your application that are all required for your application to be considered complete. In the supplemental materials includes detailed communications work plan, breakdown of cost estimate, and 1 to 2 examples of previous work. So here's an example of the proposal form. Again, that's on the Diverse Media Service webpage, a link to it. You'll have a confirmation email immediately after submitting the form, and you should respond to that email with the supplemental materials. Here's an example of a communications work plan. This template that we've provided is also on the Diverse Media Request for Services webpage. Vendors are strongly encouraged to use this work plan template, and please do not exceed 5 pages. If a vendor does not use the work plan by the state, the work plan must include the following: an overview of media formats to be used, adaptation processes, if applicable, timeline for each activity, included estimated turnaround time for message adaptation, translation, and publishing promotion. If there are partners involved, listing those partners for each activity, the number of media messages per media format anticipated, and the estimated audience reach per message. Then the second supplemental material is a breakdown of your cost estimate or your budget. We strongly encourage you to download the template for the budget from the Diverse Media webpage. If you do not use our template, their budget must include the following: cost per media format and per message, cost for adaptations if applicable, cost for media production if applicable, and then any other costs that would be required for your proposal. Then supplemental material is 1 to 2 examples of previous work. Please provide links to examples as much as possible. If content is not available to provide a link to online, please limit file size to 2 megabytes and do not send more than 2 examples. Then a quick note about that email once you submit the proposal form. If you don't receive an automated confirmation email within an hour of submitting your form, first, please check your spam or junk folder because it's very likely that it went there. If you still don't find it, you can go ahead and email your supplemental materials, that work plan, cost breakdown, and examples of previous work, to health.covidmedia.mdh@state.mn.us, and just indicate in your email that you submitted the online form but did not receive a confirmation email. And again, just to note that all of these pieces of your application, the proposal form, and your supplemental materials must be received by 11:59 p.m. on June 3rd. If you have questions about the request for services, the proposal submission form, the templates, or any other aspects of the process, please email health.covidmedia@mdh@state.mn.us, and MDH staff will get back to you within 1 business day. We will post all of the answers to the questions that we answer on the COVID-19 Diverse Media Request for Services FAQ page, and there's a link to that page from the main Request for Services website. Please submit questions by 5 p.m. on June 1st. Again, that deadline is to ensure that we're able to respond to all questions, post them on the website so that all applicants have access to the same information. We will also post these slides on the website after this session so that you can refer back to these links if that's helpful. A quick note for responders to earlier diverse media requests for services. We also had a request for services that was released in April, and we just finished negotiations for. If you submitted a proposal in response to an earlier MDH diverse media request for services but were not selected for funding, you can use components of your earlier proposal in your response to this request for services. But just a note that some aspects of the application process have changed, so please pay careful attention to all requirements and read the full question in the proposal form. And make sure you complete the entire application process, including submitting a new form and your new supplemental materials. Also, just a note that diverse media request for services is focused on media vendors or organizations who providing media services is their primary focus. Community-based organizations and tribes with broader missions are encouraged to apply for the COVID-19 Community Engagement Request for Services. There are a few community organizations or tribes who may be eligible for both, and those would be, for example, a community organization who also runs a radio station. And if that's that case, if a part of your organization is providing a direct media service, then you may apply for both if you feel that you are eligible and would like to. And then I just wanted to note the attachments to this request for service is the standard state PT contract template. There's a link to it here. This is on the Department of Administration's website. And this document just lays out the standard terms, insurance requirements, procurement laws, etc., that may apply in the event that you are selected for funding. So this is a sample contract of what your contract may look like with some adjustments. So the proposal review and selection process will be done by a review committee representing the community served by MDH and its partners. So we will have representatives from the community leaders, partners of MDH, and some MDH staff all involved in the review committee. The committee will review the complete responses that are submitted before the deadline, and that includes those that is submitted both a proposal submission form and the supplemental materials required. After this deadline, if MDH concludes that it lacks proposals reaching one of its priority communities, the submission process may be reopened and submissions will be reviewed on a rolling basis until funds are used. But until MDH decides that it needs to reopen it, if it does, the proposal form will close at 11:59 p.m. on June 3rd. So please make sure that you submit everything prior to that time. And then proposals will be scored using a numerical system out of 100 points. 20 points percent of that will be on alignment with state needs to reach all communities of color, American Indian communities, and LGBTQ communities in Minnesota. 30% will be based on the applicant's proposed plan for reaching communities with diverse media messaging. 30% will be based on the applicant's history, experience, and qualifications. 10% will be based on whether the applicant is owned and led and operated by people of color, American Indians, and or LGBTQ individuals. And then cost will factor in at 10%. I am going to exit this screen so that I can see questions that have come in because I was not able to see any questions while presenting. But if you'll let me just take a brief pause here and we'll start being able to answer some of your questions.
Yeah, and Bridget and everyone, this is Ann Lindy. I've been trying to give some preliminary answers in the chat here. I did add the caveat that these are preliminary answers, and so our whole team will review your questions and the answers and post the final answers on the FAQ page tomorrow. But yeah, I think we've gotten to most of them. One question I haven't had a chance to answer yet is, how does this RFS relate to the last round? And does MDH anticipate that this round of proposers will coordinate with current vendors? And that's a great question. And I think there may be some opportunities, excuse me, for collaboration. Although, yeah, we are holding a few calls with all of the contractors together, just so folks can hear, what everyone else is doing. But I'd say for the most part, each vendor is kind of doing their own thing. So not a whole lot of collaboration happening across media vendors. I don't know if Bridget has any other thoughts about that.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, and one other question that came in was, would you consider proposals from media vendors who focus on social media? And I mean, certainly you can submit a proposal just for social media. Yeah, I would say in general, again, we're really looking for vendors who specialize in media. So I think some of the organizations that applied for the last round that only focused on social media were kind of more of those community-based organizations with broader missions that, again, we really think are better suited to the other request for services, the community engagement one. And here we just had another question. If two or more vendors are working in partnership, for example, one vendor is making videos and one is focusing on dissemination, would that be of interest? Yes. So if you are submitting a collaborative proposal where you're co-creating, products to respond to the sort of full range of the services requested, that would be just fine. Yeah, how about folks on the phone, folks who haven't been able to chat here, or anyone else? Any other questions? Yeah, so I see a couple more questions in the chat here. So if someone was funded through the last round and their contract ends on August 31st, the question is, will this one run at the same time for a couple of months and then continue until December 31st? And so the short answer is yes. However, we would be working with those contractors to be sure that it was clear why they needed additional funding. Are they going to be using different communications methods or reaching a different audience, different geographic area for the period overlapping? We also anticipate that some of our vendors may be wrapping up their round one work before August 31st, so that would be another possibility. But yeah. And then another question, is there a limit to the number of proposals a business can submit? No, there is no limit. And then another question, would you be okay with employing youth as employees of the contract if appropriately supervised and supported? That's a good question. I don't really know what the state rules are around employing youth and what kind of insurance might be required then, but so we'll look into that one. I would say in theory, that sounds great because definitely reaching youth has been identified as a need, in terms of our COVID messaging. So we'll get back to you on that one. What if a vendor offered to make content available for others? Okay, let's see. Um, could you maybe elaborate on that one? If a vendor offered to make content available for others. I mean, so that's fantastic if folks are willing to share content freely so that others can disseminate it as well. We have had that experience with some of our current contractors. So if that's what you're saying, that's great. And yes, the slides will be posted online as soon as we can get them captioned, hopefully later today. And then let's see. Submitting on behalf of Access Press or a statewide newspaper and website for people with disabilities. Okay. Asked about making disability focused content available to see if that could be shared. I see. Okay. So yeah, so was that question about making content available to other contractors? That would be excellent. Yes. If there are some nuances to the messages around COVID, to make them more relevant to disability communities, that would be outstanding if we could get your assistance in creating some of those messages and sharing them. And one more question that came in was, if you submitted a proposal in round one and were not selected, uh, is MDH open to providing feedback? And the answer is absolutely. So please reach out to us with your request for feedback and we will get back to you very soon, hopefully today or tomorrow, to provide you the feedback on your previous proposal.
And I'll just note too that in the last request for services, we received almost 170 complete proposals, and we were only able to fund 18 vendors. And so there were dozens and dozens of proposals that were top of the line proposals that were not able to be funded just because of the limited funding. So sometimes we've provided feedback and folks haven't, the feedback doesn't say, specifically, this is how you can improve here because you might have already had a great proposal. The funding was just very limited. So we're hoping that now with additional funding, we'll be able to spread the funding a little farther to reach vendors and communities and geographic areas and communication modalities that we didn't reach in the previous funding round.
Yeah, and I see another question here about priority given to vendors to work on media formats that weren't covered in the first request. How much weight does that factor into the scoring system? And I think there again, that's going to be part of those final funding discussions. So it's hard to give you a precise percentage. I would say, yeah, I would say maybe our first priority is reaching communities that have not been covered already, but certainly media formats as well. We have noticed some gaps in the media format, so it definitely will be a consideration. I just can't give you a precise, number in terms of how much that'll factor into the scoring.
Question here,
Okay, I got
what is the definition of media vendor? If the vendor focuses on such media as websites, social media, and phone call text, is the vendor considered a media vendor? And I would just say that we're considering media vendors to be companies or entities whose primary focus is providing media services. So if you're a community-based organization who has a broader focus on providing community services or alleviating poverty, or a broader mission, then you would probably be excuse me, be better suited for the community engagement requests for proposals. So um, media vendors applying for this request for services can focus on web, social media, and those types of media formats. But in general, media vendors would be organizations or entities whose primary focus is providing media services.
Yeah. And a couple more questions here. So if you'd like feedback on a prior submission, please email that request to the covidmedia.mdh mailbox, the same one, the same email address that's given in this RFS. Also, if you were selected in the first round and have further questions, please submit those questions to that same email address. Please don't go through your current program manager for those questions. Again, we want to make sure all the questions are captured, responded to in a consistent way, and put on the online FAQ. And then I got one more question. I think I kind of answered this one in the chat, but I got one more question about whether we're open to vendors who only provide limited services such as print and digital graphic design. And again, we really are looking for more comprehensive proposals that kind of fulfill the entire request for services. So if you're just providing one component such as graphic design, we would encourage you to partner with other vendors who are able to provide the other components of the services that we're looking for. Yeah, and another question here. So let's see, a quick turnaround, I think is the question. What does it mean to do a quick turnaround? Maybe I may not have included the full word as I was hastily typing in the chat here, but so we definitely will be looking to find at least some media vendors who are able to provide same day turnaround on urgent messages to the public. But as I noted, we definitely will be funding a range of communications methods and understanding that the turnaround time for creating a video is very different from the turnaround time for posting something online. And then, yeah, the services that we're looking for are primarily a dissemination. Again, most of the content of the messages will be provided by MDH and its partners, like other state agencies. Although in some cases, vendors may find themselves, creating some new messages using sort of the scientific content, that we're sending out. But primarily, you're going to be adapting messaging and disseminating it. Okay, a couple more questions here. Let's see, in terms of the funding amounts, um, uh, yeah, so I think that information is public. The funding amounts for our round 2 contractors. So if you would like to request that information, you can email us. And then this question about, would you consider services from a company that provides community engagement as a primary service using various media outlets? but not necessarily a media company. Again, we're really trying to focus on media vendors for this request for services. You are welcome to submit a proposal, but just know that it may not be as competitive as proposals from media vendors.
I see another question here. Will this conference be posted online? And yes, the recorded video of this webinar will be posted online as soon as we caption it, hopefully later today, but if not, as soon as possible. And another question, I gather the content will also need to be designed and translated where relevant. Therefore, the inclusion of a graphic designer and translator would be helpful. Please advise. Yes, as you saw in the information that we'd like to include in your work plan and your budget, we expect that some vendors will have graphic design costs and translation costs, if applicable, for your target audience. And those would be when it was important to take a message from the state and design, adapt the graphic design in a culturally appropriate way, or provide design for a message that doesn't have any graphics, any existing graphics from the state, and then translating when there aren't already translations for your target community. So those can be, those are absolutely acceptable costs that can be included in your cost breakdown or budget. And they can be in-house costs, or they could be subcontracts to sub-vendors.
Yeah, and along those lines, there was a question about what MDH means by culturally adapted information. What does an ideal adaptation process with MDH look like? So again, we really will be deferring to your expertise and your knowledge of your communities, your audiences. So yeah, again, just knowing that you are most likely, members of your communities, you know what resonates. Um, we're just asking you to take the most important pieces of the messages that MDH provides to you and add examples. Maybe you're referring to your community's values, kind of invoking values in terms of protecting each other or keeping our families safe, whatever resonates with your community, as well as, of course, a translation as needed. And then could someone funded in round one apply to continue the work from August through December? Yes. Yes, you could. So there is a question in the online application form for folks who were funded in the last round. We're asking, basically what's going to be new or different with your current proposal. And one of the options is extending the time period for your activities. So definitely that is an option. And then there's a great question about seeing examples of what previous award recipients did with the funds. And because it was just in April that we had, media contractors starting, we do have examples. I don't know that we've really compiled them anywhere. But that's a really good question. Maybe our team can think about how to share more of those. Ask our vendors to share those with us and then share those with folks who are applying this time. Okay, and a question about translation. Yeah. So absolutely, MDH has run into this problem many times where we have urgent messages that we want to get out, but when we submit it, even for a rush job, with translation, it takes a while, and sometimes what we get back is not the highest quality. So certainly, so we'll be very interested to hear what vendors are proposing in terms of translation. If folks are able to do it in-house, excellent. That saves time and is a good quality assurance measure. But if you have other solutions, we're open to those as well. Okay, and then, yeah, a question about collaboration. If two companies are interested in collaborating on some activities but not all, should they submit a joint application or two applications indicating the points of collaboration? Yeah, I think we would ask you to apply together because if you submit, two individual applications, each of which seems incomplete, they wouldn't be very competitive. So that sounds like a situation in which you'd want to apply jointly. These are great questions, everybody. We're so happy that you could join us here and and keep us on our toes with all these good questions. Anything else from folks on the phone or other questions you want to enter into chat? And yeah, I see a question. Um, must existing vendors submit a new application if we're looking to extend through December? Yes, yes, you must.
You'll see on the form here, this is the proposition form. Um, there's a question of whether you have funding for a contract that overlaps with this contract period. And if you select yes, you'll be asked to explain how this proposal adds value to your existing contract, whether by extending your current work over a longer period of time, expanding your current work to additional audiences, expanding your current work to additional communication modalities, or other.
Yeah, let's see. Question about Sahan Journal. Yeah, I think that's because we included, let's see, maybe you're listed in round one. I'd have to go back and check, but yeah, so we had one previous request for services for diverse media. But prior to that, and in kind of an ongoing way, we also have a much smaller diverse media program, and I believe Sahan Journal is part of that. So I'll double check, but I believe you're listed under um, that kind of round one program.
Yep, Sahan Journal round one.
Great, thanks.
There's a question about an expected number of people reached on media vendor or if there's a minimum. And I would say no, there isn't a minimum. As there was a slide on the funding levels and how we expect to fund some proposals of less than $50,000 and some between 50 and 150. So we expect that if you're reaching a smaller number of people, you might have a much smaller award. For example, even $5,000 or $10,000 if you're reaching a really small community, or if you're reaching a larger community or multiple communities through multiple channels, then you might have a proposal of more like $100,000 or more.
Okay, and I see a question. Did any of the round one applicants receive full funding? And okay, so let's see, we've got the what we were calling round one, which is sort of our smaller ongoing diverse media program, and then we've got the previous request for services, which I think we were technically calling round two of diverse media. Um, and that's a good question. I'm trying to remember. I think for most of our responders for this previous request for services, I think most had reduced awards. I don't quote me. I can't promise you that none of them received full funding, but most had reduced awards, just because we were trying to fund as many as possible. So. And then another question, can you put a range on smaller number of community? Um, Yeah, I don't think we can give you specific numbers, but again, we're just looking to see that the proposals are cost effective. You know, what are you proposing in terms of how many folks you're going to reach with the funding that you're requesting? And we also acknowledge that in some cases, reaching a larger geographic area may be more costly. So. And I also got a question, is there a way we could collaborate with others here who plan to apply? Um, And I think, again, that sounds like such a great idea. I think we got this question last time around and just were not really able to facilitate that, but we really do strongly encourage you to reach out to your networks and find others who would be interested in submitting collaborative proposals with you. Yeah, and the question about whether marketing and communications firms are eligible. So yes, if they are able to provide, the full range of services requested here. So again, that might involve working with subcontractors um, or in collaboration with others, but yes, they are eligible.
I'm just going to, there's another question about the list of awardees, and I'm just going to show you this page for the COVID-19 contracts for both diverse media messaging for community engagement and outreach. And we have the list of currently funded contractors listed on this page. And round one is a longer list of applicants, both diverse media contractors and community-based organizations who are doing community outreach.
Okay, another question came in. Are you interested in supporting vendors who would be collaborating with the other community-based organization proposals? So folks responding to the other requests for services, such as a vendor disseminating info from one of those community partners. And that's actually a great idea. And certainly we do encourage collaboration across various entities. And that's something that we can try to help facilitate after folks are funded, or if you want to mention that in your application, that's just fine. Then I got a question about intellectual property. How is MDH approaching intellectual property on this contract? For example, if community members or artists create original designs. And that is one that we will get back to you on. I know there's some language related to intellectual property in the contract, and I don't want to misspeak about that, so we'll get back to you on that one. Yeah, and a question about how folks were notified about diverse media funding. Basically through our networks, we have several email lists, reaching thousands of community members. And we do have some existing relationships, with diverse media vendors. So we sent out to them and asked them to share with their networks. So we're very glad that you are looped in this time. And thanks everybody for the kind words here. We're so happy that you took the time to join us this morning. Yeah, any final questions before we wrap up here?
Well, thank you all again for participating and for your questions. Again, that this recorded webinar will be posted on the web as soon as we can caption it, hopefully later today, but if not, as soon as possible. And we will also post slides on the website, and then we will post all of these questions and the final answers to these questions on the FAQ page that's also linked from the Request for Services webpage. And a reminder that questions are due by next Monday at 5 p.m. So please get started on your applications as soon as possible so that you can reach out to us with questions before that deadline. And we look forward to reviewing your proposals and to working with you. Have a great rest of your day.